In today's video, we are going to be playing GRIXIS Fairies. This is a deck that was given to me by a cute bunny. And when looking at this deck, we have so many cool things going on. The first is we are playing FAERIES and BITTERBLOSSOM, giving us a fairy sub-theme. This, in addition to powerful cards like Ragavan and Fable, allows us to use our counter magic efficiently and finish the game quickly. And in addition to this, we are playing cards like Snapcaster Mage and Expressive Iteration, which has an insane amount of value, giving us a great game plan into the late game. And when looking at our sideboard, we are even supporting Blood Moon in this 3-color deck, which is absolutely ridiculous. So in today's video, we're going to be taking the Sweet Fairies list through a League of Modern. Match 1, we're on the draw and we're mulling to 7. Our 6 is much better, we'll put back a Snap. Opponent goes turn 1 Mesa, we top deck a Spellstutter, we'll go Polluted Delta into Mishra's Bauble. Opponent plays the Foothills and we'll bobble ourselves, and lands fine. We draw an island and a Cascade Bluffs, we'll play out the island, and then fetch Shock and cast out our Ledger Shredder. And that gets bolted on our instep. Opponent plays out a mountain into a Teferi Time Reveler, and then they downtick, drawing a card but bouncing nothing. We find a counter spell, we'll play Bluffs, and then cast out our Kolaghan's Command, killing Teferi, and making the opponent discard a card. And Teferi goes down and they discard a Binding. Opponent plays out a Dwarven Mine into a Creativity, which hits Archon, and at this point we're too far behind, this card's way too powerful, so let's get on to sideboarding. We're going to take out 3 Fatal Push, a Terminate, Kolaghan's Command, and 3 Ledger Shredder for EEs, Blood Moons, Force Negations, and Flusterstorms. Game 2, our starting hand looks great. We'll go turn 1 Fetch Shock, grabbing a Steam Vents, and then casting out a Ragavan. Opponent shocks in a Sacred Foundry, and then Prismatic Endings our Rag. We find a Tarn off the top, we'll play our island, and then dash out Ragavan. Triggering Ragavan, exiling a Dwarven Mine, and making a treasure. Opponent does nothing, we draw a Bauble, we'll cast that, bobble ourselves, and I think EE is too weak here, so we're going to shuffle that away, but first dash out Ragavan. And opponent bolts our Ragavan before it connects. And we're going to fetch Shock in a Watery Grave to get rid of the EE on top. Opponent plays tap Steam Vents, and we draw EI off of the Bauble. Flusterstorm's a great pickup, we'll cast EI. We'll put Sprite into our hand, Island on the bottom, and Bluffs into play. Opponent plays out Dwarven Mine into a Teferi, and we'll let Teferi resolve. And they go to bounce our treasure, so we'll sack it, denying them the draw. Counterspell's a great draw off the top, we will bolt down the Teferi, play out our Swamp, and hold up interaction. Opponent plays out a Foothills, attacks in for 1. We top deck a Force Negation, which means that I can go Snapcaster and EI. Then we'll flash back EI, and we'll put an EI into our hand, Spellstutter to the bottom, and EE into exile, casting it for 0. Opponent fetches out a Dwarven Mine, then casting Creativity for 2. We will Flusterstorm that, and we successfully counter Creativity. Then opponent attacks in for 1, no blocks because we have EE. We find another iteration off the top, we'll cast one of them out, putting a counterspell into hand, counterspell on the bottom, and exiling Steam Vents, shocking it into play, then passing back to the opponent. Opponent goes mountain into a Fable, we will counterspell that, and then they attack in for 2, which we will pop EE to kill these creatures. And they cast a Lightning Bolt, killing our Snap. We top deck Bolt, we'll cast another EI, putting Tarn into our hand, Delta on bottom, EE into exile, getting casted for 0, play our land, passing back, nothing from the opponent, and we top deck a Fable, and we cast that out. Opponent cast out a Leyline Binding, we'll let that resolve, and it takes out our Fable. And we top deck BITTERBLOSSOM. Don't think we're going to play that this game. We'll attack in for 2, getting a treasure, and still hold up all of our interaction. Opponent casts out an Expressive Iteration, which we will force a negation, and in response they cast a Veil, and we will Spellstutter Sprite that. Oh baby, the value. And on the end step we'll bolt the opponent. We attack in for 3, then play out our Bauble, looking at our top, and we don't want another BITTERBLOSSOM, so we shuffle that away. Opponent casts a Pending on Shaman, we'll counter that, attack in for 3 more, and opponent scoops them up. Let's get into game 3. Game 3, we keep our 7. Opponent goes tap Steam Vents, we find a Bauble, we'll look at our top, seeing Flusterstorm, guess is okay here. We'll shock in Steam Vents and cast out a Rag. Opponent plays Mountain, passing. We top deck another Ragavan, we'll go to combat, and Ragavan connects, getting us a treasure. So we'll play a Tarn, passing. Opponent plays a tapped Mine, Blood Moon, good draw, attacking again. We get a Bolt off their top, we'll play Island and slam our Blood Moon, and they cast Change the Equation, which we will Flusterstorm, and they scoop it up. Let's get on to match number 2. We're on the play with a good 7. We'll go turn 1 Islet into a Ragavan. Opponent goes Canal into Bolting Rag. We top deck a Grave, we'll play that out tapped. Opponent plays out an Island into a Ledger Shredder, and on the end step we will bolt it. We top deck our own Shredder and we'll cast it out. Opponent shocks into Steam Vents, then bolts our Shredder, and then dashes out a Ragavan. Oh, and I accidentally catch out Steam Vents, I'm so dumb. Okay, that's okay, we're fine. And Rag gets to connect sadly, only exiling a land. We find an island, we'll play that. Opponent just plays a tap Steam Vents, we top deck a Snap, and on our end step they consider. They play an island and we'll go end step Snap. We target our Bolt and bolt the opponent. Top deck an EI, good draw, attack in for 2. Opponent bolts our Snapcaster Mage. We top deck a Bauble for turn, we'll we'll play that. Looking at the opponent's top, seeing another land. Opponent dashes out a Ragavan, we'll cast a Fatal Push on it. Then they cast out a Murktide, and we have to counterspell. Then they cast out another Murktide. We top deck an EI, we'll cast one of them out. Putting Ragavan into our hand, Delta on the bottom, and Fable in exile. We'll play our island, and then cast out a Fable. Opponent attacks in for 6, then plays out a Misty. We top deck another EI, and we'll loot one of them away, finding a Tarn. So we'll lead on EI, and Bolt is exactly what we were looking for. We'll put Counterspell into hand, Watergrave on the bottom, Bolt into exile, attack the opponent for 2. Then we'll Bolt the Murktide, cast out our Snapcaster Mage, and bolt down the Murktide Regent, killing it. Opponent plays Canal for turn. We draw a Bolt, we'll dash out our Monkey, attack the opponent for 6, which exiles Counterspell. Opponent casts an EI, which we will counter, and they scoop it up. Let's get on to sideboarding. We're going to take out 3 Ledger Shredder, Counterspell, and 2 Baubles for push, subtlety, Flusterstorms, and a Fury. Game 2, we got a Mold to 6, and our 6 is quite strong. We'll put back a land. Opponent goes turn 1 Steam Vents into a DRC. We top deck an EI, we'll fetch Shock, and then bolt the DRC. Opponent casts another DRC, then plays Island into a Serum Visions. We top deck a Terminate, and we'll fetch Shock and use it now, grabbing Watery Grave and killing the DRC. Opponent plays a Bauble and looks at our top. An opponent misses land drop. We'll play out a Mountain and then cast our Fable, and they spell Pierce our Fable. Opponent casts out a EI and finds a Misty Rainforest. We draw a push, we'll cast out our EI. We'll put Fable into hand, Fluster on bottom, and Blood Crypt into exile, playing it as our land drop. Opponent casts out a Serum Visions, then plays out a tapped Fire Bluff. We find Counterspell for turn. We'll cast out an EI, and no land for us. So we'll put Counterspell into hand, push on the bottom, and bolt into exile. Then we'll bolt the opponent. Opponent plays an island into a Ledger Shredder, then bolts us, Conniving, and on the end step, we will push the Ledger Shredder. We top deck a Swamp, we'll play that out, and then slam our Fable, and it resolves. Opponent casts out a DRC, and we'll snap off a counterspell on it. Then opponent slams a Murktide. We find a land, we'll loot that away. Drawn into a Subtlety, we'll attack in for 2, and then cast a Snapcaster Mage, targeting our Terminate, and then we'll terminate the Murktide. An opponent tries to counter that, so we have to counter it back. And that resolves, killing the Murktide, and they take 2. We top deck another Snap, we'll attack in for 4. Opponent's down to 7. They cast to Consider, then they cast out a Murktide, and we'll Subtlety that. And opponent scoops them up, let's go on to match 3. We're on the draw, and hand looks amazing. Opponent goes Swamp into Inquisition, taking our Bitterblossom, so we'll go Mountain into a Ragavan. Opponent plays an Urborg into a push. Find another land, we'll play out Delta. Opponent plays Coffers, we find another land. Opponent floats some mana off Urborg, then plays another Urborg into a Karn the Great Creator. Down ticking for a Darksteel Citadel, and we'll bolt the Karn. We top deck a Ragavan, we'll dash it out, exiling an Expedition map, making a treasure. We'll play Tarn and hold up Snap. We'll play Citadel, doing nothing else. We'll fetch out an island, cast Snap, and then bolt the opponent. Top deck a Bitterblossom, we'll dash out Ragavan, attacking in for 4, which they have a push for Ragavan. Then we'll play out our Bitterblossom into a tap Blood Crypt. Opponent goes Crawling Barrens into a Devoke Despair. We'll sack our Snap and our Bitterblossom. We top deck EI, probably best draw. We'll put Counterspell into hand, Cascade Bluffs on the bottom, and Bitterblossom into exile, casting Bitterblossom. Opponent plays a Field into activating Crawling Barrens, making it a 4/4 and attacking us for 4. Top deck a push. Opponent casts out a Thoughtseize, so we'll fetch an island and counter it. They have another Invoke Despair, killing our Bitterblossom and our 1/1. Then they play out a map. We top deck a Snapcaster Mage. Guess we'll hold up Snap Counter. And they pop their map, finding Blast Zone. They play Blast Zone. In our upkeep, they will Field to Ruin our Blood Crypt. So we'll float a red. And of course we drew our Swamp. I just realized that. Unfortunate. And in our upkeep, we will flash in our Snapcaster Mage, targeting an EI. We'll cast it out of the yard. We'll put Bolt into hand, Steam Vents on the bottom, and Islet into exile. Opponent plays a Demolition Field, activates it, targeting our Fiery Islet. I think we'll draw a card in response, find another land. Then they activate Barrens, kill our Snapcaster Mage, and attack in for lethal. So let's get on to sideboarding. We're going to take out 3 Baubles, 3 Shudders, and 3 Pushes for 2 Blood Moon, 2 Jason Mind Sculptor, 2 Force Negation, Flusterstorms, and a Kolaghan's Command. Game 2, our starter looks great. We'll go turn 1 tapped Grave. Opponent goes turn 1 Swamp into a map. We find a Tarn, we'll fetch Shock, then cast out a Bitterblossom. Opponent plays Fields and activates map, finding Urborg. We draw another land. They play Urborg for turn. We top deck Blood Moon, so we'll fetch out an island, play out our Tarn, and we'll actually play our Jace out here, and we'll Brainstorm right away, putting back Ragavan and a Bolt, attacking in for 1. And on our end step, they cling one of our lands. They cast an Inquisition, taking our Force Negation, then play out a Demolition Field into an O-Stone. We draw our Bolt, we will fetch with our Tarn, shocking in a Blood Crypt, and then we will Brainstorm with Jace, finding a K-Command. So we're going to put back Ragavan and Blood Moon, play our land, and then cast K-Command, destroying O-Stone and making the opponent discard. And they scoop it up. Let's get into game 3. We're going to take out Bauble and Terminate for 2 Subtlety. Our 7's too slow, we'll mull. And our 6 is risky, but we'll keep it, putting back Counterspell. An opponent goes on turn 1 Inquisition. An opponent takes our Fable, and we knew this island was on top. we'll play that. Opponent casts a Cling, drawing a card. Then they play out a Swamp. We top deck another Forest, we'll play Swamp. Opponent plays out a Field. We top deck Bitterblossom. They cast another Cling, drawing a card. We'll grab an Island and cast a Bitterblossom. Opponent plays out a Crawling Barrens, and we draw a land. So we're gonna slam our Blood Moon, touching out Mountain, and here comes the Moon. Opponent plays a Swamp. We top deck another Moon, we'll cast EI, and opponent scoops him up. Let's get into match number 4. We're on the play, and we'll keep our 7. We'll go turn 1 Delta. Opponent goes turn 1 Otawara. We top deck our Ragavan. We'll play out our Tarn, bet Shock, play out a Ledger Shredder into a Bauble, conniving with our Shredder, and we'll put back a Bolt. And we see a Bauble on top of our opponent's deck. Opponent casts out a Bauble into a Saga, then casting Ornithopter? Guess this is Affinity, and we'll connive away a Fable. We draw Steam Vince and Spellstutter Sprite. We'll cast out a Ragavan, cast out our Bauble, conniving with Shredder, and we'll bin a Bolt, shocking our Steam Vince and attacking for 4, and we'll Bauble them in the upkeep. See enough Force Negation. Opponent plays a Citadel, holding up Saga. We draw 2 Bitter Blossoms. We'll attack in with our Ledger Shredder. On our end step, they make a Construct. They float a mana off Saga, picking up a Springleaf Drum. Then they cast out an Urza. That is spooky. Then they cast out a Nettlesis, which allows us to connive, and we find a push. And we'll discard a Bitter Blossom here. And in response, we will terminate the Urza. And they attack in for 8, and we will chump block with our Rag. We top deck a Kolaghan's Command. We know they have a Force Negation in hand, though. So we'll lead on Fatal Pushing one of the constructs, and they use Force Negation to counter it. So we'll cast our Snapcast Mage and hope we connive into a land. And we do not. So we'll discard Bitter Blossom, and we are just dead here. We'll scoop it up and get on to sideboarding. We're going to take out 4 Bolts, Bitter Blossom, and Ledger Shredder for push, K command, 2 Blood Moons, and 2 EEs. Game 2, our starting 7's a little too slow, and our 6 is much better. We'll put back a Delta. We'll go turn 1 Tarn into a Bauble. We'll cast 2 Memnites into an Urza Saga, then casting a Springleaf Drum, and a Haywire Mite. We'll Bauble ourselves. Seeing EE, that's quite good. We'll draw that and a land, playing out a Tarn for turn. Opponent plays Citadel and attacks in for 2. We draw a Sprite. We'll play Tarn into an EE. In our end step, they make a Construct. Then they float a mana off Saga, and in response, we'll pop our EE. Before it blows up, they float a mana off of one of the constructs. They find Drum, play out an Island, and then cast an Urza, and then they cast out an Aether Spellbomb. Into a Thought Monitor, good turn. We draw a Bauble, we'll cast out our EI. We'll put Bauble into hand, Mountain on the bottom, and Steam Vince into exile. We'll cast both Baubles. We'll Bauble ourselves, seeing a Swamp, and then we'll Bauble the opponent, and then we'll shock in a Steam Vince, holding up counter and our Spellstutter. When it attacks in with the team, we'll cast out our Spellstutter, and we'll chump block their 7/7. Then opponent spins an Urza, finding Thoughtcast, which they play out into a Bauble and a tapped artifact land. We do top deck a Kolaghan's Command, so we will EI. We'll put Counterspell into hand, Delta into the bottom, and EE into exile. We'll play our EE out for 0 into a Swamp. And on our end step, they try and bounce their Thought Monitor, so in response, we will Kolaghan's Command, dealing 2 damage to the Thought Monitor and killing their construct. Oh my god. How do I do this? Okay, well, punt. Let's get on to match 5. We are going to keep our 7. We'll cast out a Bauble and an Island, and we'll Bauble our opponent in their upkeep, seeing a Blood Crypt. They shock in their Blood Crypt and cast Thoughtseize. They take our Bolt. We find another Bauble. We'll play that out and Bauble them in their upkeep, seeing a Terminate. Opponent plays a Swamp into a Grief, taking our Spellstutter. Then dashing out a Ragavan, which exiles a Snap off of our top. We draw 2 Bolts off the top, we'll cast our EI, we'll put Watergrave into hand, Spellstutter on the bottom, and Delta into exile, playing that as our land. Opponent plays out a Ragavan into a Bloodstained Mire. We'll fetch out a Swamp and push the Ragavan. We draw Delta, we'll play out our Bitter Blossom and play Delta. And on their end step, they cast Kolaghan's Command, returning Grief and making us discard. So we'll discard our Grave. They play Swamp into a Grief. We top deck Shredder, but we know that they have a Terminate in hand, so we're going to save this. Opponent attacks us for 3, then cast out a Thoughtseize. So in response, we will bolt their Grief, and they take our Ledger Shredder. Then opponent casts out a Seasoned Pyromancer, discarding Dothy, getting a 1/1. We top deck Bauble, we'll play it and save it for their turn. Opponent attacks in with the team, we will trade off with an Elemental. Then they cast a Kroxa. Then they fetch Shock and play out a Swamp and slam Kroxa onto the battlefield. We'll Bauble ourselves on the end step, seeing a land, so we have to fetch away. We top deck a Bolt and a land, and opponent has us here. We gotta scoop it up and get on to sideboarding. We're gonna trim 3 Shredders and 3 Baubles for 2 Jace, Kolaghan's Command, Subtleties, and Fury. Game 2, our 7 looks amazing. We'll go turn 1, tapped Crypt. Opponent goes Swamp into a Thoughtseize, taking a Subtlety, then evoking out a Grief, and taking our Bitter Blossom. We top deck Ragavan. We'll fetch out an Island and dash our Monkey. And we exile Spyro, getting a treasure. Opponent plays the flats, we draw an EI, but we're gonna slam our Fable. Opponent plays a Swamp, we top deck Bauble. We'll loot away the Bauble that we drew, finding land. We'll dash our Monkey, and before combat, they bolt down our Monkey. We'll attack in for 2. then play a Tarn, holding up our interaction. We top deck a Steam Vents, attack in for 2. An opponent bolts our Shaman. We'll shock in a Steam Vents and hold up Subtlety in our bolt. Opponent casts out a Croxa, we'll fetch an island, then cast our Subtlety. Then opponent evokes out a Grief, taking our EI. We top deck a Snap, which is so good with Reflection. We'll attack in for 3. Opponent dashes a Ragavan. We will use Reflection to copy our Subtlety, and we will target the Ragavan with our Subtlety. And we lose our Subtlety, and on the end step, we will bolt them, cast our Snap, and bolt them again. And they concede. Let's get on to game 3. Game 3, our 7's a little too weak, so we mull, and our 6 looks much better. We'll put back a Steam Vents. Opponent goes turn 1 Cliffs into a Fury, and they have an Undying effect, having a turn 1 8/8. We find Counterspell, we'll shock in the Steam Vents and cast a Rag. Opponent plays a Flats and attacks in for 8. We top deck a Push, we'll attack in for 2. Exiling a Ragavan, so we'll play out Delta, holding up interaction. Opponent attacks in for another 8, then plays a Mire, and we will fetch on their end step. Grabbing a Grave, we draw an Islet, we'll attack in with Rag, finding a Dothy, which we will cast out, then play out our Cascade Bluffs and another Ragavan. Opponent plays a Swamp, then casts out a Grief, which we will counter, and they attack in for 8, so we have to jump. We top deck a Fable. We are going to sack their Dothy and cast their Grief, taking their Fury, and then we'll cast out a Fable and hold the land. They play out their land and find a Spyro. Good draw. Then they attack him with Fury, so we jump with Grief. We draw a Swamp. We'll loot away our lands. Finding a Snapcaster. We'll attack him with the Shaman. No blocks from the opponent, and I don't think there's any reason to play out this land. Opponent attacks in with the team. We will cast our Fatal Push. In response, they Undying Malice it, and then Spyro comes back. And in response to this, we will flash in our Snapcaster Mage and Fatal Push it again. And then we jump. We find a Counterspell for turn, and we'll just pass back. In our end step, they exile Spyro. They play out a Black Lucas into a Grief, and at this point, they have got us. GG's opponent. So ending up with a 3-2, pretty solid. Overall, I thought this deck was quite solid. Definitely needs some improvements, but super sweet deck. Thanks again to Actual Creep Bunny for providing us with this deck. Please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.